Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to have you today join the discussion with our Social Impact Roundtable. We're going to discuss how the World Economic Forum is using permissionless Ethereum blockchain in the use case of public procurement corruption. My name is Vanessa Grellet. I'm an executive director at ConsenSys and the president of the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition. Today, we're going to have an hour to discuss with our WEF specialist this specific use case, and you will learn everything about how you can deploy the public blockchain in that instance. In terms of logistics, we're going to go through our dialogue, and we'll get some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll address them at the end. Just to give you a little bit of background and set the scene on the state of the corruption and the problem that the World Economic Forum is trying to solve. The foreign bribery report of the OECD stated that 57% of foreign bribery cases occurred to obtain a public procurement contract. When it comes to the allocation of national procurement budgets, the OECD report estimates that 20 to 25% is lost in corruption globally at the government level. And that's at the detriment of the taxpayers and the citizens. The project that we are going to look at today took place in Colombia. In Colombia, it's estimated that the annual cost of corruption is 17 billion, which is equivalent to 5.3% of the nation's GDP. So we see that we are tackling huge issues here. And with me to discuss today, I have four amazing speakers. I'm going to ask each speaker to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about what was exciting for them to work on this project. Starting with Rachel Davidson-Raycraft, a World Economic Forum research assistant and co-author of the report on blockchain-based procurement. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So I have had the absolute pleasure of working on this project over the past about 9 months now. And my focus has been on the legal and policy aspects of this project. I'm a recently graduated law and public policy candidate from the University of Virginia. Prior to returning to school, I focused on microfinance, sustainable development, and human rights in Latin America and the United States, and have subsequently focused on corruption, business and human rights, and sustainable development more generally.
Thanks, Rachel. Next up, we have Sebastian Banescu, who is a senior research and design engineer at Quantstamp, Inc. in Germany, and was the technical advisor to this project.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I'm Sebastian. I'm a senior research engineer and security auditor for Quantstamp, which is a crypto-native startup based in San Francisco. And we offer security solutions and enterprise solutions in this space. It was a pleasure for me to work in this project because it was very challenging from a security and privacy perspective in order to preserve the privacy of the participants on a public permissionless blockchain such as Ethereum. That was really, really exciting, and it was great working with the team.
Thanks, Sebastian. We also have Angel Rendon, who's joining us. He's a systems and computing engineer from the Universidad Nacional de Colombia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa. My name is Angel Rendon. I'm a system and computing engineer from Universidad Nacional de Colombia. I had the opportunity to act in this project as the technical lead and CTO for the project. We were in charge of building the tool for the Inspector General Office, and something that really excited in this was really exciting for me in this project was the fact that we had to interact with a lot of people and a lot of institutions. We had the World Economic Forum, we had Quantstamp, and also Berkeley University. And it was really exciting to work with such a great team in order to come up with this tool.
Great. And then last but not least, Ashley Lannquist, who's the project lead for blockchain and digital currency at the World Economic Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley. You may know of the World Economic Forum for our annual meeting in Davos each January. About 3 years ago, we opened up a technology headquarters in San Francisco called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And that's where I work. And in that office, we started this project with wonderful collaborators, which we'll get into. For this project, I think for myself, I was really excited to do the on-site visits in Colombia, in Medellin and Bogota with government institutions and civil society institutions, and meeting with the people who could be positively affected by such a project. It was also really interesting for me to get to study deep down the use case of public procurement and the feasibility with Ethereum and blockchain. It was very rewarding.
Great. So for us to start, and some in the audience may not be that familiar with the project, I think it would be great, Ashley, if you could give us an overview of the project, including, the actors, the expected outcomes, what were the goals of the World Economic Forum and the other actors when they engaged in that project, so that everyone is sort of level set, and then we'll dive into the details.
Yes, great. Okay, so the World Economic Forum led this project. The Inter-American Development Bank was the other major institutional partner, along with the Colombian Inspector General's Office, or for the Spanish speakers in the audience, La Procuraduría General de la Nación. And that's a very important public institution in Colombia. It's charged with investigating allegation of corruption and wrongdoing by civil servants in the country, along with other things. And we worked very closely with them, and they really wanted to learn about blockchain for supporting their mission and their work. So they were a critical partner in this, along with Sebastian at Quantstamp and Max Fang from UC Berkeley and Blockchain at Berkeley, who's not on this panel, and the National University of Colombia, where Angel is. So those were the major parties involved with the project. Of course, on the ground in Colombia, we also worked with the relevant stakeholders, like the National Bidding Agency, who covers public procurement in the country, and mayor's offices. From a high level, what we're talking about here is the use case of public procurement. For those who aren't aware, public procurement, or public contracting, as it can also be called, is where governments on any level, local, state, or national, they want to purchase goods or services, from the building of bridges or airports to supplying schools and hospitals, any of these type of purchases. They generally must provide a public auction for providing these services in order to have competitive pricing and competitive bidding for those auctions, or for the contracts. So we have, with public procurement, an auction process. And it's reverse auction. The lowest price tends to win. The government will choose vendors who offer competitive pricing and have strong profile and experience to supply that contract. There's a lot of corruption, as Vanessa was talking about, that tends to happen in this process. It's actually the place globally where more public sector funds are lost to corruption than anything else. About $1.5 to $3 trillion globally, or 2 to 3% of global GDP. In many developing countries, it's the #1 problem or issue of the country, actually, in terms of blocking and stopping social progress, economic progress, environmental welfare. So it's a major problem. And what we wanted to do was experiment to see if blockchain technology can help address some of the risks that happen in the procurement process. So there were a lot of aspects of the procurement process that we'll talk about, where we can decentralize or automate functionalities, and where we can provide transparency, which of course public blockchains allow. So we were really interested to see if you could run a public procurement process, run an auction process where the government evaluates various bids and assigns scores to them and chooses a winner to provide the contract. and run that on smart contracts in a totally public and permissionless manner on Ethereum to provide public auditability, public monitoring, and to be able to prevent, deter, and surface any corruption that might be happening with the awarding of those contracts.
And so, Ashley, you lead the projects at the Center of Fourth Revolution. How did the World Economic Forum select this project, and what were the underlying goals? What did it want to see from the project?
Yeah, so there were two big reasons here. So why we selected the project, we wanted to work in and support Latin America, and we found a critical partner in the Colombian Inspector General's office and in the IDB, where we identified this very good fit and high potential project of investigating blockchain for government processes, where we can try to improve transparency. Actually, the forum was very interested in investigating how blockchain helps transparency in government. That was a core motivation for us, and what type of policies and technology and design considerations would have to happen so that transparency is positive and in the instance of blockchain, and that it's not used for additional exploitation or things like that. So we were really interested in that. And then we found these wonderful partners in Colombia. So that's why we selected this, the effort to work in Colombia on government transparency. And for public procurement specifically, number one, it's the largest challenge facing some developing countries, and it's a problem across the world. It's a substantial problem. And number two, it has certain processes that can be benefited from blockchain technology. And we can get into those, but we put those two things together and realized if we could just move the needle on reducing the problem of corruption in procurement by using blockchain technology, that would be substantial. And also that we could publish and produce the findings that we realize over the course of the project, hopefully for the benefit of the world, for other people to learn from and build upon, and think more about how blockchain can be used for open government and transparency in government.
Amazing. And maybe it would be helpful if Angel could take us through what this procurement process looks like, so that we understand where, after the tech comes in and changes or enhances that project. Angel, could you just take us through that? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. Well, what I'm going to explain now is the overall process. Everything starts with the public entity releasing an RFP draft. It's a document with all the things that should be supposed to have the procurement process. According to the law, we have up to 10 days to have a session of Q&A from the public in general. So some changes could be considered by the public entity and can be introduced into this document. However, in the final 5 days, any change will raise an alert to the Inspector General office, because it could be a change done to tailor the process, benefiting some vendors over others and harming the other ones. Once this step is finished, the public entity reach a final document and the bidding process begins. So all the vendors can submit their bid offers into this phase, protecting their identities and their offers as well. And this has a gap of 10 days minimum. After this period, all the vendors can reveal their identities, claiming their own bid offers. And then an evaluation of the qualifying criteria is done over the bid offers. This will filter those vendors that not fulfill the qualifying criteria, and will let all of those who fulfill these criteria into the further process. Once this is achieved, the decision is published, so the public can make comments on this decision So it gives the opportunity to all the parties involved to, for example, make amendments over the final list, or even, and this is really important, to raise alarms to the General Inspector Office in order to track any suspicious activity in the qualifying criteria selection. After this, the public entity is supposed to make a preliminary winner identifying process. This is done by checking all the open questions that the vendors have answered over the tender process, and will publish the preliminary winner selection. Of course, this will make the public to have a period where they can make some comments over this decision, and gives the opportunity to the tenderer to amend this selection, and also will raise some alerts to the General Inspector Office. So the General Inspector Office can track all what has done with the process during its life cycle. At the end, what the process considers is the final selection of the winner. And then it comes all the legal aspects regarding to the contract.
Great, that's really interesting. And we see all the touch points where there's the opportunity for corrupt actors to act or try to manipulate the process, right? So before we get into more the technical explanation of this, the World Economic Forum brings together governments, large corporations, sustainability actors, to drive the conversation and policies. And I know, Rachel, you focused a lot on this. Would love to know, what was the outcome from a WEF's perspective on what you're going to publish? What do you hope to achieve with these actors, following this POC and report?
Sure. And I think the inherently multidisciplinary nature of procurement, and then also our multidisciplinary take on the report and the solution, made it a really exciting and I think a comparatively comprehensive solution for this governance context. And as Vanessa and Ashley have discussed, due to the extent of and prevalence of procurement corruption, countries overwhelmingly already have codified pretty robust laws and regulations to prevent or punish these acts. And Angel also mentioned how much the blockchain technology interacts with these existing laws. So we felt that to really maximize the anti-corruption potential of blockchain-based procurement, it was necessary to understand why and where these robust laws have fallen short, and then to build a technological solution and policy universe that could best fill existing voids in accountability and transparency. I think an important thing to note before I discuss some of the key policy takeaways is that blockchain-based procurement would not necessitate an overhaul in laws and policies around procurement. For example, Colombia actually already has in place really strong procurement laws and policies. And on the one hand, blockchain-based procurement can complement these existing laws by structurally injecting the procurement process with greater transparency. But on the other hand, we also, in the forthcoming report, we do provide a menu of additional policy recommendations that we felt go above and beyond existing policies in many countries and would particularly complement a blockchain-based procurement solution, though also speak to e-procurement more generally. And sort of three key takeaways, I would say, that are featured in our forthcoming report is that government should really consider maximizing the use of competitive procurement processes. Blockchain assists this by providing a secure and efficient platform. But even if this platform exists and governments continue to use processes with a single vendor, for example, it's really hard to root out corruption. A second takeaway is that government should encourage and facilitate citizen monitors. Blockchain's radical transparency presents really unprecedented opportunities to engage citizens in this capacity, which is really exciting, and can take various forms. It could be a group of citizens or a single citizen or a group of citizen experts. But regardless of the preferred format, government should really consider legally empowering citizen monitors, assisting them with intuitive tools like checklists, protecting them from reprisal, which is really important, and then also ensuring that they're coupled with responsive government partners. And then the third key takeaway is considering other spaces of governance where a similar blockchain solution might prove useful for anti-corruption purposes. And in the forthcoming report, we highlight a number of different use cases that could be considered and capitalize on blockchain's qualities in a similar way as in the procurement context. For example, blockchain-based land registries or beneficial corporate ownership registries could inject these really high-stakes governance systems with increased transparency and accountability, just like in the procurement space.
Well, that's great lessons learned for all of us. We'll give some thoughts while we'll try to understand the technical implications of this POC and project. And we're going to drill down into really the challenges that you guys faced when implementing this from a technical perspective, from a privacy perspective, and from a legal perspective. So starting with Ashley, you built the solution on a public Ethereum blockchain. First of all, the question is, was blockchain necessary here? Was this the only answer to finding a robust response? And then why Ethereum? And then why public Ethereum? What were the characteristics that make you shift towards that choice?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we were compelled to investigate blockchain because of a couple features, and when you bundle all these together, they make an argument that this could be good for public procurement, where the risks of public procurement are. So number one, the permanent and tamper-proof or tamper-evident record-keeping process that you have with especially public permissionless blockchains. Number two, the real-time procedural transparency and auditability that you have. So all the transactions that would happen during the procurement process, the bid gets sent, the city or the tenderer is evaluating these bids and scoring them. All of that is recorded in real time in the blockchain system, and because of the censorship resistance, cannot be deleted. And automatic functionalities with smart contracts, and then just general decentralization. You remove the reliance on the discretionary power of human decision makers and centralized parties who might be prone to corruption. So combine all those things and blockchain technology gets compelling for public procurement. And we'll talk more during this talk about like where we really found the most unparalleled or the most competitive value of blockchain technology. As a preview, some of the stuff can also be conducted with regular traditional technologies, such automated functionalities, degrees of transparency, of course, and certain ways to decentralize things. But blockchain technology was the only technology that we found where you actually can be sure, for instance, that a bid submitted from a company isn't actually just completely wiped off the table or deleted by a central authority in the city or in the bidding agency. So that censorship resistance was pretty valuable when we're talking about corruption use case. And on a higher level, I think corruption is a really fertile ground for identifying blockchain use cases and for trying to apply blockchain because of the decentralization you want and that power of censorship resistance and data permanence where no one can remove the record of a transaction having happened. So in terms of Ethereum, first of all, we needed Turing completeness properties because we were using smart contracts. So within that realm, for us, we wanted to experiment with Ethereum because, number one, it has the highest network hash rate among the permissionless blockchains. So that was a key security parameter. So we could be more confident that that records aren't being manipulated or wouldn't be manipulated once they get put on the Ethereum ledger from a double spend attack. Number two, the ecosystem of innovation in Ethereum is very active, so that problems that we could identify as we go through the project, we think that some of these issues, for instance, scalability, anonymity, that we could come across, there will be continuous R&D in those issues that could maybe help address them and resolve them, or challenges that we come across will have a lot of eyes looking at them to try to improve upon the challenge that exists in Ethereum today. And then lastly, there's a lot of developers who could develop, there's a lot of very knowledgeable developers, such as Angel and his team, who have experience with Ethereum, who are able to code in it and build operations, and also in the future that there would be as well. And then public and permissionless blockchain, of course, we needed a public blockchain, public view ability, because inherent in this project, which I think we haven't maybe highlighted enough, is that we need citizens and people to monitor the auction process. This project is all about enabling citizen monitoring and oversight. It's actually part of a philosophy of open government, where government should be held accountable in their processes from citizens, and the solution is seeking to aid that and help that, and as a result, improve corruption and accountability. And then we wanted it to be permissionless for the security, and also because we wanted to maximize decentralization as well. So, and maximizing the security and decentralization that you get with permissionless blockchains, and the data permanence, censorship resistance are all very valuable for anti-corruption.
Great. Well, that's a very thorough explanation. Thank you very much. So diving into sort of the challenges that you had to face when you went through the process, and understanding the process and how to accommodate for that with the blockchain. The bids in the auctions are anonymous. So anonymity of the vendor is a key requirement and a difficult problem to address. How was that achieved in this context on the blockchain? And this is a question for Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa, for the question. Indeed, like what Ashley mentioned before, the transparency offered by the public Ethereum blockchain is great. However, when you throw in requirements such as the bids and the identities of the bidders, or the vendors as we call them, need to be anonymous up to one point when they need to be revealed, that becomes really interesting from a privacy and security perspective. To solve that in this project, we record the bids in publicly viewable transactions, and in order to preserve the anonymity of the bidders, we use a cryptographic primitive which is called a commitment scheme. And basically, the bidder generates on their client side, so on their own machine, which is not viewable by anyone, they generate a hidden ID, which they're going to use in order to place the bid. Now, inside of the bid, which is encrypted, they're going to place their public ID, the one that is known by the authorities. And they're also going to place the details of their bid, so the prices and all the details required in the auction. Now, since all of this is encrypted, no one is going to see the identity or the value of the bid placed by this bidder. They're just going to see that a hidden ID, some random Ethereum address, basically, sent a transaction containing some ciphertext and stored that ciphertext on IPFS. And then they also stored a hash and a reference to that ciphertext on the Ethereum public network. Now, after the bidding period is over, and like Angel showed at the beginning in the timeline, the bidders need to reveal their offers. So basically, the commitment scheme reveal part is done at that point, where everyone decrypts their offers, and the authorities can see the vendor ID and the bid details. So at this point, basically, there's no longer this requirement for anonymity, because everyone should see who bid and what are the details of that bid. Now, there's also some challenges when it comes to this solution that we chose, and that's basically the attainment of cryptocurrency inside of that address, which is the hidden ID. So we considered several solutions, one of which was that the vendor would be self-funding and then reimbursed by the authorities, maybe. So the vendor would basically acquire some cryptocurrency in some way, and afterwards they would be reimbursed once the bidding period is over. However, it might lead to a lot of false bids, since the volatility of cryptocurrencies is quite high. The price that they paid when they submitted their bid might be different from the one that they want to get when they claim their refund. Another solution would be to use privacy-focused cryptocurrencies, such as Zcash, which was an interesting option. However, my favorite option was that the vendor would be required to pay the transaction fees, such as they would pay, for instance, postage costs in order to send out a hard copy of the bid. So my hope in the future is that all of these public procurement systems will be using Ethereum, and the transaction, the gas price would basically be equivalent to the paper, the ink, and the postage stamp needed to submit a hard copy today. So that is probably way cheaper to pay. That's basically, I hope.
It's actually quite a price to send, recommended letters, and it's quite a process to do it in the paper form. So hopefully we'll find a solution there. But if you were able to solve for that anonymous bidding with encrypted names, how did you know that the bidders were legitimate bidders? And maybe that's a question for Angel. How did you know that you just didn't have like random people who were trying to, block the system or things like that?
Well, thank you for the question. Despite the tool is being deployed into a permissionless system, the business logic behind this context requires the bidders, in this case the vendors, to be registered before the national bidding agency. So we have to mix two things here, because for one side we have to be sure that the system was censorship resistant. So we had the opportunity to allow anyone who wants to bid an offer into the system. And at this point, as you can remind from the timeline I showed before, in this step, everything should be anonymous. So no one could know details about the bid offer up to this point. So the idea is, once the vendors are claiming their identities over the bid offers, the system will enter into a phase of evaluating the qualifying criteria. And one of those criterion are actually a certificate of registration issued by the National Bid Agency. So this is a requirement that these vendors have to fulfill in order to participate into the tender process. So the system will take this information and validate that it's actually done properly before this agency, and then they can continue with the process if everything is okay. For those who haven't submitted such a certificate, the system will just stop with their bid offers up to this point, and it will make it out of the process.
Oh, Vanessa, you're on mute.
Even though it's permissionless and everyone could potentially put a bid, you have to be on a list of registered vendors that pre-registered before putting the bid. And you're able to identify that automatically.
I want to also reiterate why vendors need to be anonymous, because it's not clear. This is generally the case or the legal requirement in all countries. We want to prevent the opportunity of vendors for colluding over price that they would provide in the bids. So that's why all these vendors need to be anonymous during the bidding period when they're submitting their pricing, or any forms of collusion or bribery that they could do with themselves or even with the contracting city.
Yeah, and that brings to the point about the tamper-proof bidding process and how we can make sure that the bidders, once they put their bids, don't modify their bids once they've received additional information or confidential information. So Sebastian, how do you do that? And how is the content in the bids kept totally confidential from the other bidders or third parties?
Right, so that is the magic of public key cryptography. Basically, on the client side, the software that we built generates a public key pair, which is keeps the private key visible only to the bidder for the duration of the bidding process, and therefore no one else other than the person who generated that key is able to decrypt the bid, which is placed on IPFS, and therefore they cannot see what is inside of that bid. Does that answer this question?
Yeah. And how can they be sure that the bid isn't manipulated after they submit it? Right.
So that again goes back to the commitment scheme cryptographic primitive that we use in this project. I hinted towards in my earlier answer. We basically put inside the vendor ID to preserve anonymity, and we also put the bid, the details of the bid to preserve the integrity of the bid that was made. And basically the ciphertext, which represents the encrypted bid, is stored on IPFS, and a cryptographically secure hash of that ciphertext is put on the Ethereum blockchain together with a reference to the ciphertext. Now, the immutability of the blockchain basically prevents anyone from tampering with that hash that is stored on the Ethereum network, right? And it also prevents the vendor from changing anything in their bid, because if they would change even like one character inside of their original bid, that would result in a different ciphertext, and hence it would result in a different cryptographic hash. Therefore, it would be detected by anyone who can, basically anyone can verify this, since both of these things are public. So once the tendering process is finalized, the general public can just verify if all these bids have been modified or not. And if they're modified, they can just disqualify the bidder, right? Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. And in terms of the system overall, have you had to face any spamming or draining attacks, and how were they addressed if it happened, and how do you go about these attack vectors?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for your question. So basically, there are these dangers of spamming attacks when it comes to the public being able to comment on the bids and on the bidders that were selected and so on. So at each each point where the public can comment, they can, of course, we want anyone to be able to raise red flags. However, some malicious entities could abuse this feature in order to create a lot of clutter that would potentially block the entire bidding process. So what we did is take a process approach towards the solution here, and we said that we're going to select the winning bidder as it was decided. However, we're also going to start an investigation in parallel and check if those comments, those red flags that were raised, are actually of concern or not. Basically, another issue, another way to mitigate such spamming would be just to require anyone who comments to pay transaction fees, right? However, since we wanted, like, this would really reduce the participation of the general public. So in our POC, we decided to implement another approach where we have basically a pool on the back end, which is used in order to allow users of normal Web 2.0 websites to place comments, and then that comment is basically taken by our software, our backend software, and placed in a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain. So we're basically making it easier for people to participate this way. Now, one way in which we were thinking of actually protecting this solution that we chose is to use blacklisting of IPs. But this is unlikely to be very effective, since anyone can just use a VPN or another computer or what so. And it's still like relatively an open question. However, we need to also make sure that we're not sort of blocking people that actually want to raise red flags and they do it over and over again, right? And placing a gatekeeper that would basically moderate comments would also be dangerous, because that's exactly the point where you could introduce a corrupt agent, right? So censoring or moderating these comments is also a source of attack, and especially toward by the thing that we're trying to solve here, which is corruption.
Yeah, and you can imagine that we've seen how you can protect sort of the names of the bidders, the information, but how do you protect, third parties and citizens who may have information about specific corruption and want to raise red flags, but are afraid also of repercussion? So how did you guarantee in this process that everyone who put a comment was not able to be identified or, face repercussion? Maybe a question for Angel.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, because as the very nature of a procurement process that is being subject of corruption, people who has information and want to reveal such an information or to raise alarms over these corrupted processes are prone to be threatened. So this was largely discussed within the team in order to know what to do with the users, because we were facing decisions over whether to permit them to make their own transactions over the system in order to put all these comments into the procurement process. But at the same time, this could make possible for other people to correlate such a transaction and individualize such subjects. So what we decided at the end was to, as Sebastian said previously, we decided to open this website where people could freely put their comments, and the system would put those comments into the proper smart contracts in form of transactions on behalf of them. Of course, Sebastian also said previously, we are willing to deal with the fact that most of those comments could be just spam comments, or even some comments are not honest and would try to harm honest participants into the whole process. So we are willing to deal with those kinds of comments. And of course, it will require also checking one of them. But at the end, this is what matters to the Inspector General office, because they want to have all the material in order to make the process open, and they want to make their vigilance and watch task in order to get all the material into the process.
Thank you, Angel. And so we see how complex this process is from a technical perspective, managing, local governments, all the stakeholders, making sure that their rights are preserved. How do you think about next step, and how scalable and repeatable do you think this project is for other governments or other entities who have these type of procurement process? Large companies also have procurement processes. So how would you think that this is going to be taken forward?
Sure. So as previously mentioned, the forums report will be coming out later this month and on May 27th. And the report will provide technical and policy guidelines for governments and other relevant actors to leverage for their own purposes. It's more government focused, but I think it's a useful tool for anyone who's involved in the procurement process. And the report will contain a model RFP with technical specifications, a basic evaluation framework, and also a menu of policy recommendations amongst other tools. And I think it's important to note that no two solutions will look exactly the same. Different countries or localities and industry contexts have different needs and preferences, but our vision with this project and with this report is to inspire other governments to leverage and reinvent the foundation that we laid with our pilot in Colombia, and to, first assess the utility of blockchain for public procurement in their context, and then also hopefully reinvent such a system to best fit their own needs.
And overall, and this is more a group question, what would you think the lessons learned are from your experience? And would love for you to share with everyone who's on the call today.
So for me, the key takeaways in a paragraph for everyone in terms of this feasibility of study of blockchain for this use case are that, number one, public permissionless blockchains, such as Ethereum, provide a real value add from their censorship resistance and data permanence capabilities that helps with anti-corruption use cases. So comments made from the public cannot be deleted. Bids submitted from legitimate vendors cannot be deleted. All scoring and decisions from the cities cannot be deleted. However, there were very real current challenges in public permissionless Ethereum that we stumbled across in this POC. One being anonymity and the challenge of maintaining that required vendor anonymity, given the public nature of transactions and the gas transaction fee that has to be sent from the vendors. And then another one, which we didn't get into, is scalability. Currently on layer 1 Ethereum network, it wouldn't be highly scalable to implement the solution. So basically, those two big challenges, scalability and anonymity, to us point to potentially wanting to investigate permissioned blockchain networks or hybrid blockchain networks. Because in permissioned network, you wouldn't have transaction fees, and you could have scalability. So you could get over anonymity, some of the anonymity problems and some scalability problems. However, with those, of course, you'll sacrifice some degree of security in terms of data permanence, as they have lower hash power, or depending on the consensus algorithm, generally lower security against tampering of records. However, a hybrid blockchain solution is quite high potential, because you could perform some operations on the permissioned blockchain, the day-to-day operations of the decisioning by the city and submitting bids, and you wouldn't need transaction fees. It could be scalable, but you still take the hash record of bids and of public complaints and post those onto Ethereum for permanent record keeping. So you could blend a bit of the best of two worlds. Ideally, we would still want to go back to a public Ethereum solution, because that's really where you get the unparalleled security in terms of manipulation against records. However, we need to address scalability and anonymity problems. So to us, I think it points to the importance of research and development in cryptography, in things like zero-knowledge proof, ZK snarks, and other zero-knowledge proof cryptography for providing vendor anonymity, as well as scalability in terms of layer 2 blockchain solutions or layer 1 blockchain scalability solutions, or other solutions that I'm sure you're hearing about all day today at Ethereal.
Thank you, Ashley. And besides the technical, challenges that you face, and maybe it's a question for Angel, were there any challenges dealing with the in the Colombian context? And have you heard of other projects that are similar to this one in the world?
Okay, well, during the development of the project, it was really essential to pay close attention to user interface and user experience, because, of course, we are dealing with a new kind of tool that will leverage on top of blockchain, and this is not massively adopted yet. So we wanted to, for the end user, to get interactions with a system that let them do what they were supposed to do in the context of the public procurement process. So this is a key element that I would say was essential during this development. And also in the Colombian context, it was really nice to see the engagement of the government. They are really willing to adopt these kind of tools. I mean, not just blockchain, but cutting-edge technology in order to make the electronic government more easy and traceable. So if you have the support of your government, it is quite easy to come up with new proposals using the technology and this. But at the same time, this also arises the need for having public servants trained in the use of these technologies and how to deal with them. Also, it's we have a huge need to make more research and development on not just on this kind of tools, but how to improve them. As Ashley said, something that is really important is the need to invest more on cryptography, because this will enhance the way these kind of tools work. As for if we have heard about other tools pursuing the same objective, we are aware that in Spain there is an initiative called Open Canarias, where they are tackling the same problem, but in a different way. Of course, our own reality was quite different, because we also had to deal with legacy systems that, as I said before, and this is another lesson learned, while feasible in terms of technology, the regulatory aspects still have some gray areas. And while feasible, we still have to deal with the fact that the law was not enough clear to say how this kind of tool should be implemented and used in order to have all the material to the service of the control entities, such as the General Inspector Office. So those are the lessons that I think are most valuable, at least for me. Yeah.
So we see thank you, Angel, the complexity of dealing with government stakeholders from a policy perspective, a technical perspective, a human design perspective. And I think the World Economic Forum brings everything together. And so thank you so much for our discussion today. We have 5 minutes to address questions. So if there are any questions, please add them in the chat so that we can have our speakers move forward and answer them. So I don't know if I see all the questions. Tom, do you see any specific questions in the chat that we want to address?
No questions yet, so I'll just serve one up since I have the opportunity. I think one of the in undertaking this project, and I think as we think about it more broadly, are there any recommendations that you all have in terms of making it as easy as possible for the beneficiaries of blockchain in these use cases, like understand what is sort of going on in the background? Like, how do you approach that? Is it to explain, or is it to just talk about the results?
And then we have 2 more questions. So maybe who wants to take this one? Ashley? Rachel?
Maybe Angel, I'm thinking.
Angel?
In Colombia.
This is really interesting because the success of implementing this kind of tool is a massive adoption. So for us, it's not just a matter of implementing public procurement process on top of blockchain, but also remarking the benefits of using this kind of tools and the benefit for not only the control entities and also the government, but also to boost and enable citizens to have access to public vigilance. And this is something that I really think it's important. Of course, in order to achieve such objective, I would say that it would be really need to train people on the effects of using these technologies, the benefit of using cryptography massively adopted in this kind of technologies. So that would be something that I would highly recommend.
Great. I have another question for Michelle. A question for Sebastian. Have you looked at using any stablecoins instead of the crypto for settlement process you've referred to?
No, at the moment when we were developing the RFP and the design, we considered the options of stablecoins, but we didn't choose that direction because I think they were not so prevalent at the time. However, now that we know, I guess we've been working on this for 1.5 years now. Now that we know more about stablecoins in the past year, I think it would be a very good option to avoid that volatility issue that I mentioned.
Yes. Great. And then one question from David. Is the proposal that the system receives viewable prior to the name? Meaning, do you have a list of the proposals without the name that the staff can review?
The bids are submitted by the vendors during the bidding period. When the vendors have to be anonymous, all the bids are encrypted.
Okay.
So you would see that a bid comes through, a hash is taken on Ethereum, an encrypted bid comes through, but you don't read the contents. Then when the city when the bidding period, it's actually automatically closed after a certain period from the smart contracts, and then bid evaluation is started. The bids are decrypted and everyone can see all of the information of the contents and the bidder.
Great. Well, we have 1 minute left. I really want to thank all our speakers here for sharing their experience and their findings, and be on the lookout for the report on May 27. I'll share it on social media, and I'm sure we'll learn even more things that we haven't had time to touch upon today. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.